Hi guys, before we go any further, yes, if you enjoy this video, give it a thumbs up, leave a nice comment in the comment section below, and if you're not already subscribed, click the subscribe button and the little ringety-tingety bell on the right hand side of the subscribe button to get a notification the next time I put a video up. Right, that's that out of the way. Okay, I had an interesting question off a viewer the other day, and here it is. Pete Esposito. Yeah, hi Pete. With regard to Topaz Denoise and the video I put up about it not so long ago. And in that video, if you remember, there'll be a link to it below or up there somewhere. I was showing you how I use Topaz Denoise on smart objects inside of Photoshop. And Pete says, "Hi Andy, this is the video I've been looking for. Thanks." Nice one, Pete. Yeah. One question: how would I use this workflow on batch processing? I shoot concerts, and the need for batch process is strongly needed. Okay. As I've already put as an answer here to Pete, I can't see how you can utilise that process that I showed for batch processing, because you've got to have this interface from either Lightroom or Camera Raw to actually open the image as a smart object, and that requires some sort of, or would require some sort of automation, action-wise, inside of Lightroom or Camera Raw, and you can't do that. So the thing with Topaz is quite simply this. I'm going to just shut Pete's question down. So I hope you do find this useful, Pete. I don't quite know how you work and what software you work with, but this is the way I would approach your problem. So I've got a rapid sequence of 20 raw files. I mean, these guys, muskox, my God, they look like they belong at a blooming rock concert, don't they? Yeah, all that long hair. Ooh, yeah. Yeah, oh, God, that hurt. But, but it's one and the same thing. So we've got this sequence of shots here. Now, yeah, I mean, I've done concerts in the past where I come away with a couple of thousand images, not a problem. And we can't really send even just these 20 files as Camera Raw smart objects into Photoshop, because it would be just unwieldy. Nobody's got enough RAM in the machine to do that. And so you would have all sorts of problems, especially if you were dealing with more than 20. So what you always want to do with Topaz is to get the noise reduction done very early on in the processing. Now, everybody who puts a YouTube video up about Topaz Denoise AI, always seems to use it as a plugin, and I sort of don't understand why, even though you saw me using it as a plugin in the previous video. There is a facility in Topaz Denoise for batch processing. And so what we're going to do is we're just going to look at batch processing in Topaz, and we'll look at a DNG thing. Not that I'm a big fan of DNGs, but they do come in handy from time to time. So I think we'll just about get on, and you'll see where I'm going with this. So what I would suggest to Pete and anybody else who does the sort of concerts and things like that, is to try and break your images up in Lightroom or Bridge or whatever into groups where the lighting and your camera settings are pretty much an even spread across all the pictures in a particular group. So, I mean, yeah, that's the sort of thing I do. So, in essence, what I've got here is one group. All right. Now, these belong in a folder, or they're living in a folder in my example catalogue here in Lightroom called Batch. And if I right click on Batch, I can create a folder inside there. And you can see I've got an empty folder here called Topaz Output.-dng. And I'm going to show you how I would approach this. All right. Now, to do this, you're going to have to open Topaz Denoise in its standalone form. I can't see another way of doing it other than open it in its standalone form. So we'll open it as a standalone program. And this is what we're greeted with. I hasten to add I'm in Topaz Denoise, the latest version, 2.3.1. Because since I did that original video, we've had about 6 blooming upgrades to Topaz. And now we've got a new version. But this is not new to this version. You can do this with 2.7 or whatever. So it says here, drag or drop folders or images, right? So I'm just going to come over to my Finder, and I've got this folder called Batch, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag it and drop it. And look here, here's all these CR2 files. And they're in a big row. How's that for cool? So that's all 20 of those raw files are in there. So what I'm going to do first of all is come to select all, and I'm going to put a check mark in there. So I'm selecting all of the images within that particular group, where all the camera settings, the lighting, the subject, and so fundamentally the level of ISO noise that you're trying to get rid of is the same. So, perhaps that's a simple way of getting you to understand why I say you should, or I suggest you batch these pictures into groups. Right, so we've got our preview here. It's running at 100%, and it looks okay. To me, it looks a little bit too smooth. So there's a sort of new feature now where if we go to low, well, first off, if I say I want to take the sharpness off when it's in Denoise AI, you can see I can only take it down to 1. I actually want to take it off completely. All right. So it says at the bottom here, if you want even less sharpening, use low light mode. So we're going to go to low light. Okay. And we're going to take all the enhanced sharpness off. And I think this still looks way too smooth. So I'm for these pictures, I'm just going to set it at sort of 2. Because even though they're 2000 ISO on average, they are not really all that noisy. They're off a Canon 1DX Mark II in a good amount of light, so I don't expect to see a lot of noise in these images. But, it is what it is. But I don't want any topaz sharpening on these. I just think Lightroom sharpening is a little bit better. And I could also have the option to sharpen her in Photoshop with an action. So anyway, if we now go and save these 20 images, we get this dialog box and it says start batch processing. Preserve source format. It won't preserve source format because the source is CR2, EOS Digital RAW. All right, so what I'm going to do is switching to DNG, because saving as source format will still spew out DNG files. Just leave the file name at auto, and for where it says save directory, you can either save them in the source directory, which is so you'll be saving them alongside the raw files, or in this case, because I'm trying to do a batch process, I'm actually going to save them in a custom folder, and it's that folder that we created in Lightroom, which is Topaz Output.dng. So I'm now going to click start. Alrighty, and so this is going to take a while, so I'll pause the video and I'll come back to you when the entire export process is done, when I've got something to say that may or may not be of importance to you. Okay, so I'll see you in a minute. Okay, so you can see right down at the bottom we're on the last one, and each one of these is taking about 35 seconds to actually process and export at the same time. So we are just about finished now. As you can see, we're on 85 and 90. Woohoo, yes, soon be there. And there we go, we are done. Okay, so basically we are now finished with Topaz Denoise. So I'm going to close Topaz Denoise. Okay, here's our original raw files, and what I now need to do is go to this Topaz Denoise DNG folder, or Topaz Output DNG as I called it, and what we'll do is we'll just go synchronize folder, import new photos 20, because there was 20 raw files. We took those into Topaz Denoise as raw files, and so we've now got 20 files processed in a batch by Topaz. So we'll go synchronize, and there we go. And so I'm just going to go import, and we are sorted. So just while Lightroom's building its standard previews, you'll notice they come in as Denoise Low Light DNG. So it's just telling you the DNG files, they've been run through Topaz Denoise under the low light processing algorithm. Now, this is where I just want to say something. People who've followed my channel for a long time, and those who've been coming to me for one-to-one teaching for a long time, know that I'm not a big fan of DNG. I can't really see the point of it. But, you know, there you go. I'm just an old fuddy-duddy, an old fart. So, but here's the thing about DNGs. DNGs are not always what they seem. Is it a DNG or is it not a DNG? I don't quite understand what goes on with the DNGs that come out of Topaz Denoise. I'll come to that in a moment. But, of course, what we can do is we can select all of these images now, and so I can go to any one of them and take it over into the develop module, and as long as I've got auto sync on, I can just come into the dev module and I can do whatever it is that I want to. So if we go and have a look at an image at full magnification, it's a little bit too dark. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to the tone curve, and because anybody who follows me or is a member of my Patreon will know I'm a big fan of what you call process version swapping inside of Photoshop. Inside of Photoshop, what am I talking about? Inside of Lightroom. So all I'm going to do is just hit one of my process version swaps, which basically all it does is change to this little subtle inverted S-shaped tone curve, and you can just see I've opened up the blacks just a little bit. So we'll come into the basics panel, and I might just go and add a little touch of vibrance, and of course because I'm in auto sync and I've got all the pictures selected, these settings are being applied to all the pictures at the same time, and I might just go and lift the black value up just a little bit, rather like that, and I might just go and warm the image up just a little tiny tad, and yeah, I think that looks all right. I don't really see the point in doing any local adjustments to it, because this video won't really benefit from having any local adjustments done to it, but you could go and do local adjustments to the images as well. So when it comes to the batch processing, I am a high volume shooter under certain circumstances, but I'll never shoot high volume under time pressure, and because I'm a wildlife photographer. So, you shoot high volume as a wildlife photographer as and when the opportunity presents itself, but you never really find yourself in a batch processing scenario. But I have done batch processing in the past when my jobs have required me to do so, but it's a long time ago. So, anyway, this is, as I said before, just a sort of an overview on how I would tackle doing batch processing using Topaz Denoise right at the start of the raw process. So we've got our batch done now. Of course, if you've got 6 or 7 batches of images to do because they were all shot at different ISOs, you'd have treated each batch individually for noise inside of Topaz Denoise. But of course, once you've got them all in, you might want to process all the batches simultaneously. You'll just do the batches individually like what we're doing here. So do we need to go into the details panel? Let's go and check. It's got default sharpening on. I might just come and drop the radius of the sharpening down just a little tiny bit. I might take the detail up to around about 50, because that means we are, how can I put it, we're sort of halfway between unsharp mask with halo suppression and single iteration deconvolution. And then I might just go and hold down the Alt key and just come in and make sure that we are not overemphasizing the sharpening. And yeah, I think that looks all right. Maybe back it off a little bit. It's a little bit too aggressive because of the noise reduction done in Topaz. I think that looks a-okay. And of course, that's all there is to it. So we've got all of these images in this batch, which in this case is 20, but it could be 200, it could be 400, it could be 1,000. And all we would then have to do is just go File and go to Export, and then we could select our export parameters, whether we wanted them as TIFFs, 16-bit, JPEGs. We can do, obviously, the resizing. I could go and save them as JPEGs or export them as JPEGs, in the sRGB color space, with the selectable quantity, resize to fit, long edge 2500, which would be, I don't know what you'd use that size for. That's the sort of size that I usually export a JPEG to if I'm going to put it on Facebook or any other social media, screen sharpening, etc., etc. And if you got 2,000 or 3,000 images that you were exporting, you could set your computer up and set Lightroom up to do this export, and then walk away from it and go to bed. Yes, and just leave it overnight. Of course, you can specify where you want it to go to, where you want to put it in a subfolder or not. Much the same as you would if you were batch processing in Photoshop. If you were going to batch process in Photoshop, this is where your problem would lie in Pete's original question, where I was doing that operation in Photoshop with Topaz. You've got to get the images from Lightroom or Adobe Camera Raw as smart objects. If there was some way of automating that and getting them into Photoshop, and you could actually take them in as batches, but there's just no way to automate that smart object production. And plus the fact, with the smart object production method that I was showing you in the previous Topaz Denoise video, requires sort of a hands-on, you're there at the time, fiddling around with the Topaz Denoise controls. And no, it's not for automation. But this is how to get Topaz Denoise into a batch automated or semi-automated process, just staying inside of Lightroom and getting the Topaz Denoise done on the actual beginning of the processing before you actually go and process the images at all. But as I said, yeah, it does require the formation of DNGs. Now then, I've got these DNGs in here, all right? So if I go to, where is it now? I've forgotten. We have to come to the library, and if I go to library and validate DNG files, well, let's see what happens, you see. Now, invalid DNG files, 0. Not validated, 20. All right. Now, you can see as I list them there, these are all the DNGs that came out of Topaz. Right. Now then, if I just temporarily click OK on that and I come back to batch, and I'll just come back to a grid view, alrighty, and what I'm going to do is I'm just going to hit the 9 key, and that will put a blue label, colour label on the DNGs, and I'll just come to this last original raw file. Alright, this one. Now, this isn't processed at all. This has got Lightroom's sort of background initial import process on. But if I go to library, convert photo to DNG, and I just go convert only raw files, DNG, medium size, embed fast load data, and just click OK. And now you can see that's turned to DNG. It hasn't actually turned the raw file into a DNG. It's created a DNG from the original raw file, but the original raw file is now not in the catalogue. I have to go and re-import it if I want it. But if I now go to library and I go to validate DNGs, you see invalid DNG files, 0, not validated, 20, not 21. So Lightroom's DNG validation will validate the DNG that is created by the Adobe DNG converter that's hidden inside or works inside of Lightroom when I actually converted the raw to a DNG, but it won't validate the Topaz DNGs. And there is another thing about the Topaz DNGs that I'm not too sure about. If I go to this Adobe DNG and I go to Show in Finder, and then I right click and I go open with, and let's go and open it with Raw Digger, you can see what the DNG looks like. Alrighty, and if I now come to one of the Topaz Denoise DNGs, you'll notice my Mac operating system can actually give us a thumbnail preview of the Adobe DNG, but not of the Topaz produced DNG. And if I just right click and I go open with, and I go open with Raw Digger, just wait for Raw Digger to open up again, there you go. And that sort of harps back to what I showed you in a previous video about the Topaz DNGs. I'm not quite sure what goes on with them, but it doesn't matter what you open these DNGs with, they invariably look like this. Yeah. Unless you open them. I've not tried opening them in Capture One, but if you open them in, try and open them in Raw Therapy, they look like this. If you try and open them in Darktable, they'll look like this. What they look like in Affinity, I don't know, or any of the Luminar or anything like that, I just don't know. But for the programs or the applications that I use, these DNGs produced by Topaz always have this weird colour cast all over them. And yeah, and yet, funnily enough, even though Lightroom can't validate these DNGs, it still makes a good job of reading them. So I get the sort of feeling that the DNGs are as they should be, but there's a little bit of a key code somewhere that's not quite working as an Adobe converted DNG or a proper standard DNG conversion would work. So, you know, I mean, it is what it is. But Lightroom / Camera Raw can read these DNGs fine, so they can form part of your workflow And of course, you can go on to put processing alterations on them in Lightroom or Camera Raw, or even Photoshop if you wanted to. But for speed, for getting images out, I would use Lightroom or Camera Raw and then just batch export them. So we've applied Topaz Denoise to the raw files, yes, in batch mode, and then we've brought them into Lightroom, imported them into Lightroom, processed them as a batch, and then we can then, as I showed you before, we can export them out as a batch. So that's the way I would approach batch processing. Pete, I hope that sort of covered the info. And yeah, guys, so don't forget, Topaz Denoise will actually read your raw files. Yes, it will. Oh, okay, guys and gals, if you got anything useful out of that and if you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up. Leave a nice comment below. If you've got anything nasty to say, keep it to your bloody self. It's becoming a bit of a saying of mine, that, isn't it? Yes. And yeah, if you feel like giving me and this channel a bit of extra support, in the description below or on the end screen, you will see a link over to my Patreon channel. And I'd just like to take this opportunity of thanking all those people who are regular subscribers to my Patreon channel. Yes. And I've got a lot of people on there who have been there for a long time, so they obviously find the content really good. All right, and it's good value for money. I hope it is anyway. All right, guys and gals, until the next time, stay safe, stay well in these trying times, and keep taking the pictures. And until the next time, I'll see you. Tooroo.